I was the billionaire CEO he walked away from. At his wedding to his mistress, one sentence from me changed everything. The first thing you need to know is that I was not supposed to be there. Not at that venue, not in that dress, not standing at the back of a rooftop reception, watching the man who once told me I was too ambitious to love, watching him dance with someone else under lights that probably cost more than my first office lease. But I was there. And I was smiling. Not the kind of smile you put on when you're pretending to be fine, not performance, not mask. I mean, the real kind, the quiet kind, the kind that lives in the body before it reaches the face, the kind that only comes when you know something nobody else in the room knows yet. I was there because 3 years ago, Adrian Wolf sent me 11 words in a text message and thought that was the end of my story. He was wrong. And tonight, on his wedding night, he was about to find out exactly how wrong. Stay with me, because what happens next is not what you think. The night begins with a phone call. I almost don't answer. It is a Tuesday. I am in my office on the 14th floor of a building I own, reviewing quarterly projections with my COO Priya, when my phone buzzes face up on the glass table, and I see a name I haven't thought about in months. Dominique. Not a crisis, not business, just Dominique, who has been my closest friend since the years when neither of us had anything, and we split the cost of bad coffee in a shared workspace and told each other we were going to build something worth remembering. I answer on the third ring. "Tell me you've seen it," she says, and her voice has that particular energy. Not excited, not alarmed, somewhere exactly between the two. "Seen what?" "Zara." "Dominique, I'm in the middle of—" "He's getting married, Adrian, this Saturday, the Meridian Grand rooftop. It's all over the social pages." I don't say anything for a moment. Priya looks up from her laptop. She reads my face the way she always does, quickly, accurately, without asking. "Zara," Dominique says again, softer now. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I say, and the strange thing is that I mean it. I hang up. I sit with it for exactly 30 seconds, the way you sit with news that should hurt, and instead just feels like information. Then I open my laptop, navigate to the public filings database, and I look at the status of something I have been quietly, carefully building for 8 months. Wolf Capital Group. Acquisition by Zara Coal Holdings. Status pending final approval. Expected completion date, this Friday. I close the laptop. I look at Priya. "Clear my Saturday afternoon," I say. She doesn't ask why, she just nods and reaches for her phone. That is the kind of woman Priya is. That is the kind of team I built. And that the building of it, the long, patient construction of every piece, is where this story really begins. Not at the wedding, not with the sentence. It begins 3 years earlier in an elevator, at the end of 4 floors of crying, on the night I finally understood that being left behind was never the same thing as being left behind for good. I want to tell you who I was before Adrian. Not because it matters to him, it never particularly did, but because it matters to this story. Because the version of me that walked into his orbit is so different from the version of me that walked into his wedding that sometimes I look back and struggle to recognize her. I grew up in a house where money was always the subject nobody would name directly. My mother worked 2 jobs and called it managing. My father had big ideas and smaller follow-through, and a way of talking about the future that made it sound like a place we were always about to arrive at and somehow never did. I watched both of them work hard and stay still, and I made a decision very young that I was going to understand money. Not just earn it, but understand it, the architecture of it, the way it moved and why, and who controlled the movement. I studied finance. Then I studied strategy. Then I worked for 3 years at a consulting firm, where I was consistently the most prepared person in the room and consistently the last person credited for it. That is where I learned that talent without positioning is just potential with nowhere to go. And then I met Adrian Wolf at an industry conference, and he was charming and sharp, and he actually listened when I talked about market strategy, and he said, "I'm building something. I think you should be part of it." And I was 28 years old, and I believed him. In the beginning, it was everything he said it would be. We worked side by side on what would become Meridian Tech, a mid-sized firm operating at the intersection of financial services and digital infrastructure. I wrote the business plan. I built the financial model. I sat across from investors and walked them through projections with the kind of precision that makes people lean forward in their chairs. Adrian presented. Adrian charmed. Adrian closed. We were a machine. And for a long time I told myself that the division of labor made sense, that I was the engine and he was the face, and together we were something more efficient than either of us alone. I told myself the credit didn't matter, that what we were building was what mattered, and anyway we were together, and together meant that his wins were my wins, and his name in the press was simply a practical arrangement, not a statement about who had really earned it. I was wrong. But I didn't know that yet. The night I began to understand was a Thursday in March, about 2 years into our partnership, 9 months into our engagement. Meridian Tech had just closed a landmark acquisition, a deal I had personally negotiated over 8 months, flying to 3 cities, rebuilding the financial model 4 times, staying in the office until the cleaners came and went and came back again. It was the biggest thing the company had ever done, the kind of deal that gets written about. And it was written about, extensively. I found the article on a Friday morning, coffee in hand, sitting at the kitchen island in the apartment we shared. The headline named Adrian, the subheading named Adrian. The third paragraph named Adrian. My name appeared once, in a clause so subordinate it barely existed, described as a member of his internal team. His internal team. I set down my coffee, I read it twice, then I read it a third time in case I had somehow misunderstood the grammar. I hadn't. That night over dinner I brought it up, carefully, not accusatory. Careful, because I had learned that Adrian responded better to precision than to emotion, and I wanted to be heard, not managed. The coverage, I said, setting down my fork. The article didn't mention my role, not really. He looked up from his plate. I ran that deal, Adrian. 8 months. 3 cities. The model, the negotiations, the restructuring in the final week that saved the whole thing from falling apart. He was quiet for a moment. Then he set down his fork, too, which I recognized as his way of signaling that what he was about to say was considered, measured, the product of reasonable thought. Zara, he said, you know I value what you do. You know that. This isn't about value. It's about credit. It's about optics. His voice was patient. The particular patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone who was making it unnecessarily complicated. Investors back names. They backed mine. That's the architecture of how this works. You understand architecture. I understand that I built something and someone else got named for it. He reached across the table and touched my hand. You and I know the truth of it. That's what matters. And the terrible thing, the thing I have to be honest about, is that part of me accepted that, not because I believed him entirely, but because I loved him, and because love, when it's been with you long enough, has a way of softening the edges of things that should stay sharp. I nodded. I picked up my fork. I swallowed it, but I didn't forget it. The pattern continued, quietly, consistently, the way patterns do when nobody names them, the conference where he was the keynote and I was in the audience. The investor dinner where I was introduced as his partner in the romantic sense and not the professional one. The internal meeting where my strategy document was presented by him, word for word, to a room that had never heard my name. Each time, I swallowed it. Each time, something in me kept a record. And somewhere in the second year, without entirely planning it, I began to write. Not for Meridian Tech. For myself. A white paper on market positioning strategies in emerging fintech infrastructure. Dense, specific, the kind of document that circulates quietly through serious professional networks and gets forwarded by people who recognize precision when they see it. I published it under my own name. Zara Cole. Not Zara Cole, Chief Strategy Officer at Meridian Tech. Just Zara Cole, alone on the page. I didn't tell Adrian. Not because I was hiding it. Because I had begun to understand, somewhere below the level of conscious thought, that I needed something that was entirely mine, something with my name on it that nobody could absorb or present or describe, as a member of their internal team. I didn't know then that the white paper would change everything. I just knew I needed to exist somewhere outside of his orbit. The morning the engagement ended was ordinary in the way that catastrophic mornings always are. Nothing announces itself, the sky doesn't know. The coffee maker doesn't know, The light coming through the kitchen window is the same light it always is. I woke up to an empty bed. He had left early. The gym, he said, though he had been saying the gym more often and coming back less energized than a gym should make anyone. I noticed it the way you notice something you're not ready to name yet. I filed it away. I made coffee. I picked up my phone to check messages. And there it was. A text, sent at 6:43 in the morning while I was still asleep, while he was presumably somewhere that was not the gym, sending 11 words to the woman he had asked to marry him. I need someone who matches where I'm going, not where I've been. I read it once. I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the counter and stood very still for a moment, the way the body sometimes goes quiet when the mind hasn't caught up yet. The coffee maker finished its cycle. The apartment was silent except for that small mechanical click of it settling. Then I picked up the phone and read it a third time. Not where I've been. I was where he'd been. That was what he meant. I was the past. I was the version of his life that no longer matched the version of himself he was building. The newer, larger, more important version that apparently required a different woman standing next to it. I stood in that kitchen for what felt like a long time and was probably 4 minutes. Then I walked to the bedroom, pulled 2 suitcases from the closet, and began to pack with the focused efficiency of someone who has decided, at a cellular level, that there is no version of this that involves staying. I packed my clothes, my books, the small frame photograph of my mother and me at my graduate school ceremony, the folder of financial documents I kept in the bedside drawer, because even then, even in love, I had never entirely stopped being the woman who understood that security was something you built yourself. I did not pack anything that had been ours. I did not want ours. I left the key on the kitchen counter. I did not leave a note. I called a car. I rode down in the elevator with 2 suitcases and the specific numbness that comes before the feeling arrives. And somewhere between the 4th floor and the 3rd, the feeling arrived. I cried for exactly 4 floors. Not the gasping, undone kind. The quiet kind, tears dropping onto my hands where they held the handle of my suitcase, breath moving in and out with the controlled steadiness of someone who is not going to come apart completely because she has somewhere to be. Because I did have somewhere to be. 3 weeks before that morning, before the text, before the empty bid, I had received an email from a firm called Nexus Capital. They had read my white paper. They wanted to meet. Not with Meridian Tech, not with Adrian Wolf's internal team. With me. I have thought about the timing many times since. Whether it was strategic on my part, some instinct below consciousness that had begun preparing an exit before my conscious mind agreed to take it. Whether the white paper was always a door I was building in the back of a room, just in case. I don't have a clean answer. I only know that when the elevator doors opened, and I walked out into the lobby of that building for the last time, I was not walking into nothing. I was walking toward Nexus. The meeting happened 6 days after I moved into a furnished apartment on the east side of the city. I unpacked my 2 suitcases, bought a coffee maker, and sat at a small desk by the window drafting questions for a conversation that was about to determine the next chapter of my life. Nexus Capital was not the largest firm in the room. They were precise, selective, and known for backing founders who had been underestimated. Which, as it turned out, was a category I fit with uncomfortable accuracy. The partner I met was a woman named Gloria, early 50s, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of stillness that comes from having sat across many tables from many people and learned to wait for the moment that reveals everything. She slid my white paper across the table. It was printed out, annotated in red pen, with sections bracketed and questions written in the margins. "You wrote this," she said. "It wasn't a question." I did. "Not as part of your role at Meridian Tech." "No, independently." She looked at me for a moment. "Why?" I thought about how to answer that honestly, without sounding wounded or bitter, because wounded and bitter are not qualities that close funding rounds. "Because I needed to know that I could build something with my name on it," I said, "and I needed other people to know it too." Gloria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What would you build if you had the capital?" I had prepared for this question. I had prepared for every question, but this one I answered without notes. I talked for 22 minutes. When I finished, Gloria closed the folder in front of her and said, "When can you start?" That was the beginning of Zara Holdings. I want you to understand what the next 3 years looked like, because it would be easy to compress them into a montage of success and miss the texture of it. The specific weight of building something from nothing when you are doing it alone, and the person who was supposed to believe in you has moved on to someone he finds more suitable. The first year was hard in the way that first years always are. Cash flow problems and sleepless nights, and the particular loneliness of being the only person who fully understands what you are building and why it matters. I had Priya, who had been at Meridian Tech, and came with me because she saw what I saw and was tired of watching someone else get credited for it. I had Dominique, who showed up at my office with food on the nights I forgot to eat. I had my mother, who called every Sunday and never once suggested I should have stayed. I did not have Adrian. I noticed his absence differently over time. In the first months, it was the personal absence I felt, the space where a person used to be, the quiet of a life that had organized itself around someone and now had to reorganize around itself. That kind of absence is loud in a particular way. It fills rooms. But by the second year, what I noticed was professional. I watched Meridian Tech from a distance, the way you watch weather from inside a building, not involved but observant. I watched the company stall without the strategic engine that had been quietly running it. I watched the products miss their markets. I watched the press coverage shift from celebratory to cautious to concerned. I watched Adrian do what he had always done, present well, perform confidence, attribute the problems to external factors in the market and the specific cruelty of an industry that didn't recognize his vision. I felt nothing about this that I am particularly proud of, but I did file it away. By the third year, I was running a company that had begun to attract serious attention. We had closed 2 funding rounds. We had 3 product lines generating consistent revenue. We had a team of 26 people, and every single one of them knew my name and what I had built and why. That matters to me more than I can properly explain. The knowing, the being known accurately as the architect and not the internal team member. There is something it does to a person, being seen correctly, that I had not fully understood until I had been unseen for so long. And then, 8 months before the wedding, the opportunity arrived. Wolf Capital Group, the firm Adrian had launched after Merit Tech's decline, smaller and more leveraged and bleeding slowly from 2 failed product cycles, had gone quietly onto the market. Distressed but structurally valuable, the kind of acquisition that makes sense if you have the right infrastructure to absorb it, which I did. Nexus called me on a Wednesday afternoon. Gloria was direct, as she always was. Wolf Capital is available. The assets are undervalued. The team is salvageable. There is a legal and logistical pathway to acquisition that is clean and solid. She paused. You understand the personal dimension. I do. Does that complicate it for you? I thought about that for the full 45 seconds I mentioned earlier, not longer. 45 seconds is actually a long time when you are being honest with yourself. No, I said. The acquisition makes strategic sense independent of the personal history. I'm not buying it because of him. I'm buying it because it's the right move for the company. And the fact that it was his? I was quiet for a moment. Is a detail, I said, not a motive. Gloria said, all right then, let's move. The paperwork took 8 months. Legal due diligence, structural review, regulatory filings, board approvals. 8 months of careful, methodical work, conducted with the same precision I had applied to every significant thing I had ever built. The filing was scheduled for completion on a Friday. Adrian's wedding was on a Saturday. I am a person who believes in coincidence about as much as I believe in luck, which is to say, I believe they exist, but I do not rely on them, and I do not confuse them with meaning. The timing was coincidence. What I chose to do with it was not. The dress was midnight blue, not black, an important distinction that my assistant Kezia understood instinctively when she brought 3 options to my office on Thursday afternoon and placed them on the rack without commentary. I chose the midnight blue. Quietly devastating, Kezia said, and went back to her desk. I arrived at the Meridian Grand at 6:45 in the evening. The ceremony had been scheduled for 5, which meant it was over, which meant I had missed nothing I needed to see. I did not need to watch him make promises to someone else. I had heard enough of his promises. The lobby of the Meridian Grand was all marble and low light, the kind of architecture that makes ordinary people feel like they are somewhere significant. I had been to this building before, years ago, for an industry dinner that Adrian had been invited to speak at, and I had attended as his guest. I remembered standing in this lobby feeling like an accessory. I walked through it now like I owned it. The elevator to the rooftop terrace was mirrored on 3 sides, and I stood in my reflection for the ride up and thought about 4 floors of crying in a different elevator in a different life, and I felt the full distance between that woman and this one, and it was not a distance measured in time or money or professional achievement. It was a distance measured in clarity. I knew who I was now. That was the distance. The doors opened. The rooftop was extraordinary. I will give Celeste that. She had taste, and she had spent accordingly. White gardenias in suspended crystal vases catching the last of the evening light. Tables draped in something that moved like water when the breeze came through. A string quartet in the far corner, playing something so beautiful it almost deserved a better occasion. The city spread below and in every direction, lights beginning to come on as the evening deepened, the kind of view that makes people feel like the world is arranged specifically for them. I found a position near the back, close enough to observe, far enough to be mistaken for any other guest. I ordered sparkling water from a passing server, and I stood there, in my midnight blue dress, and I waited. Adrian was near the center of the terrace, white tuxedo, that particular way he had of holding a champagne glass like it was a prop, a conscious choice, because with Adrian, everything was a conscious choice, every gesture calibrated for the impression it created. Celeste was beside him, laughing at something, her hand on his arm, her gown moving perfectly with every step. She looked genuinely happy. I watched her for a moment and felt something that was not malice and not sympathy, but a kind of adjacent sadness, the specific sadness of knowing something about a situation that the person living it does not know yet. She didn't know what her husband was built on. She would. The first sign came at 7:14. A man in a dark blazer crossed the terrace with the particular body language of someone who carries news that cannot wait, forward lean, focused trajectory, eyes on the target and not on the surroundings. He reached Adrian and spoke in a low voice that I could not hear from where I stood. Adrian laughed. That laugh. I had heard it 1,000 times. Confident, dismissive. The laugh of a man who has decided the information being delivered to him is not a problem because he has decided not to have problems. He waved the man away. I checked my phone. A message from Priya, filing confirmed public as of 6:58 p.m. Congratulations, boss. I put the phone back in my clutch. The man in the dark blazer had not left. He was standing at the edge of the terrace, and I watched him speak to 2 other men in suits. Adrian's professional guests, colleagues from Wolf Capital, the kind of people who check financial news at a wedding because they are constitutionally unable to fully switch off. The information was moving now, quietly, quickly, like a current beneath the surface of the celebration, a whisper here, a shifted expression there, a phone discreetly checked and then discreetly lowered with a face that had changed. The string quartet kept playing. The candles kept burning. Celeste was laughing at something her bridesmaid had said. And then Adrian's COO, a man named Stefan, who I had met twice during due diligence, without him knowing why I was meeting him, reached Adrian and said something in his ear that was short and precise. I watched the surface of Adrian Wolf crack. Not dramatically, not obviously. It was a small crack, the kind only someone who had studied his face for years would recognize. A fractional stiffening around the jaw, a stillness entering the eyes that had nothing to do with calm. He turned. He scanned the room, and he found me. The moment of recognition moved across his face in 3 distinct stages. First, confusion, the genuine bafflement of a mind trying to place an image that doesn't belong in its current context. Second, understanding, the slow, horrible assembly of pieces into a picture. Third, something I had not entirely anticipated. Not rage, not grief, but a specific kind of reckoning, the expression of a man who is finally, for perhaps the first time, looking directly at the thing he had turned his back on. We looked at each other across a rooftop full of people who did not yet understand what they were witnessing. He started walking toward me. Long strides, jaw set, The champagne glass transferred to his other hand in a gesture I recognized. He was preparing to use his dominant hand, to gesture, to make points, to argue. He was preparing to fight. I stood still. I did not adjust my posture. I did not look away. I held my glass of sparkling water with the same ease with which I had held every difficult room I had ever been in, and I waited. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. Zara. My name in his mouth, after 3 years, landed differently than I expected. Not as pain, not as warmth, simply as a sound that had once meant something and now meant something else entirely. Adrian. I kept my voice level, pleasant, the tone of someone who is not remotely surprised to be standing exactly where they are standing. Congratulations. What are you doing here? Not a question. The shape of a question without the openness of one, a confrontation dressed in syntax. I was invited, I said, which was true in the technical sense of the word, though the invitation had not come from him. The acquisition. His voice had dropped. Around us, the reception continued, oblivious, the string quartet finding its way into something that was almost unbearably romantic given the circumstances. You bought my company. I looked at him for a moment. He was still handsome, Adrian Wolfe. Still capable of performing certainty even when the ground was disappearing beneath him. I noticed this the way you notice things that once moved you and no longer do, with a kind of detached acknowledgement, the recognition of a fact that carries no current charge. Our company, I said quietly. I just made it official. His jaw tightened. You can't. I did. Completely legally. Every document signed, every filing completed, publicly recorded as of 6:58 this evening. I tilted my head slightly. You should have your team check the board structure when you have a moment. You'll find my name in several places. This is my wedding day. I know. You came here to... I came to celebrate, I said. The acquisition and your wedding both felt like events worth marking. Zara. And now there was something in his voice that was different from the control and the confrontation. Something underneath, something almost raw. This is... I know what it is, I said. And then I said the sentence. Not loudly, not with triumph in my voice, because triumph would have been the wrong note, and I had waited too long and worked too hard to play the wrong note now. I said it the way you say something that is simply and completely true, with the quietness of a fact that has always existed and is only now being spoken aloud. Every floor of that building exists because of work I did, and starting Monday I'll be running it properly. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, I watched Adrian Wolfe's face move through everything he was. The performer losing the performance. The man beneath the image, standing on a rooftop in a white tuxedo, finally looking at the full cost of every small erasure, every casual theft of credit, every time he had looked at the woman beside him and seen a resource instead of a person. 4 seconds. Then I set my glass on the table beside me. I picked up my clutch. I said, "Enjoy your evening," and I walked away. Behind me, I could hear the sound of the celebration continuing, the string quartet, the murmur of 100 people who did not yet understand what had just shifted on this rooftop. I could hear Celeste's voice somewhere, bright and unaware. I could hear, just at the edge of audibility, the beginning of a conversation between Adrian and Stefan that was going to be long and difficult and was no longer any of my concern. The elevator arrived immediately, as if it had been waiting. I stepped inside. The doors closed. The mirrored walls gave me back my own reflection. The midnight blue dress, the stillness in my face, the small and genuine smile that had been living in my body all evening and had finally arrived at my mouth. I rode down alone, and this time I did not cry for a single floor. The lobby of the Meridian Grand at 8 in the evening was moving with the particular energy of a city that does not stop for anyone's personal reckoning. People arriving, people departing. The indifferent choreography of a building that had witnessed 1,000 significant moments and would witness 1,000 more without marking any of them. I walked through it toward the exit and the cool night air and the car that was waiting, and I felt something I want to try to describe accurately because I think it matters. It was not triumph, not exactly. Triumph implies that someone has been defeated, and defeat was not the point. Adrian's company was undervalued and structurally recoverable, and the acquisition made strategic sense. I had said this to Gloria, and I had meant it. The satisfaction I felt standing at that exit was not about his humiliation. It was about completion. There is a specific feeling that comes when something unfinished is finally fully finished. Not the loud feeling, not the one that announces itself with champagne and speeches. The quiet feeling, the one that settles into the body like the last piece of something clicking into place. The feeling of a room that has been rearranged into exactly the order it was always meant to have. That was what I felt. 3 years of building. 3 years of early mornings and late nights, and choosing, every day, to make something instead of mourning something. 3 years of becoming, slowly and precisely, the version of myself that the elevator crying version could not have imagined. And on a rooftop, in 4 seconds of silence, I had simply let him see it. That was enough. My phone buzzed as I stepped outside. The city opened up before me, all light and movement, the organized, beautiful chaos of a million lives, continuing in every direction. I looked at the message. It was from Dominique. It said only, "Well?" I stood on the steps of the Meridian Grand for a moment, the night air on my face, the city below me, and I typed back 2 words. "It's done." Her response came before I reached my car. "I have wine. Get here." I smiled. The real kind, the quiet kind, the kind that lives in the body before it reaches the face, and I walked into the night. Dominique's apartment smelled like garlic and red wine and the specific comfort of a friendship that has survived enough difficult seasons to stop requiring explanation. She opened the door before I knocked. She had heard the elevator, and she looked at me for exactly 1 second, reading everything she needed to read in my face, and then she stepped aside and said, "Start from the beginning." I sat on her couch, shoes off, feet tucked under me, and I told her everything. The filing, the dress, the terrace. The man in the dark blazer moving through the crowd like a current. The moment Adrian found me across that rooftop. The sentence. When I finished, Dominique was quiet for a moment. Then she poured me more wine and said, "How do you feel?" I thought about that. Really thought about it, the way you think about a question when you want to answer it honestly rather than conveniently. "Finished," I said. She looked at me. "Not finished like tired," I said. "Finished like complete, like a thing that needed to be closed is closed." Dominique nodded slowly. And him? Seeing him? He looked like a man who had just realized that the story he'd been telling himself about his own life had a chapter he hadn't read. She was quiet for another moment, then she raised her glass. "2 chapters?" she said. "2 chapters," I said. We drank. Outside her window, the city continued its indifferent, magnificent business, and inside her apartment we talked about other things. Her latest architecture project, a film she wanted to see, a restaurant that had opened near her studio. Normal things, life-sized and present tense. It felt extraordinary. I drove home at midnight. My apartment, not the furnished one from 3 years ago, but the one I had bought 14 months earlier on the west side of the building I now owned, with windows that faced east so I woke up to light, was quiet and exactly as I had left it. I made tea, I sat at my kitchen table. I opened my laptop and looked at the Wolf Capital Group file one more time, not because I needed to check anything, but because I wanted to see my name on it again. To confirm it was real. To close the laptop knowing that Monday was coming and Monday was mine. My name was on it. I closed the laptop. I went to sleep. Monday arrived the way significant days often do. Ordinary in its surface, extraordinary in its weight. The sky was the particular gray of early autumn, the kind of light that doesn't commit to anything but illuminates everything evenly. I dressed carefully. Not dramatically, a charcoal suit, clean lines, my quietest heels, the kind of outfit that says I have nothing to prove because I have already proved it. Priya met me in the lobby of Wolf Capital Group at 8:45. She was carrying 2 coffees and wearing an expression that I recognized as her professional composure, sitting directly on top of significant personal satisfaction. "Ready?" she said. Yes. The building was a 12-story glass structure in the financial district, the kind of architecture that had been fashionable 15 years ago and was now simply functional. Competent, unremarkable, the built equivalent of a company that had once had ambitions and had since settled into the business of surviving. We rode to the 8th floor, which housed the main operations. The elevator opened into an open-plan workspace, where approximately 40 people were doing the specific thing people do when they know something significant is happening and are waiting to understand what it means for them personally. Working with slightly too much focus, conversations slightly too quiet, the collective body language of people who are pretending not to watch the door. They watched the door. Priya and I walked through it. I felt the room recalibrate, the specific shift that happens when a space adjusts to the presence of someone unexpected. I stopped in the center of the floor. "Good morning," I said, clearly, not loudly, the voice I used in rooms I was about to change. "My name is Zara. As of Friday, I'm the new owner of Wolf Capital Group. I'd like to speak with everyone for 10 minutes before the day begins, if you'll give me the time." Silence. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone stood up. Others followed, not because they had been told to, but because rooms have instincts, and this room's instinct was to stand. I spoke for 9 minutes. I told them the acquisition was strategic, and the company was structurally sound, and their positions were secure. I told them I was not interested in the past, not in blame or in loyalty tests or in relitigating anything that had happened under previous leadership. I told them I was interested in the next 12 months and what we were going to build in them, and that anyone who was interested in building it with me would be heard and respected and credited accurately for the work they did. That last part landed in the room differently from everything else. I saw it move across faces, a small shifting, something loosening. The particular relief of people who have worked for a long time in an environment where credit was unevenly distributed and have stopped expecting anything different. A woman in the second row raised her hand. "Did you used to work here?" The room went very still. "I used to build this place," I said. "Now I own it. The difference matters." A laugh moved through the room, not mocking, the kind of laugh that is also a release, that is also a beginning, the kind that means a room has decided to trust something. Priya exhaled beside me. After the meeting, I took the corner office on the 8th floor, the one with the east-facing windows that nobody had claimed because everyone understood it had been Adrian's, and Adrian's things carried a weight that outlasted his presence. I stood at the window for a moment, looking at the city below, and I thought about all the rooms I had stood in as a support, and all the rooms I was now standing in as the center, and I let myself feel the full distance between those two things. Then I sat down and began to work. The first week was a study in organizational archaeology, the careful process of excavating what a company actually is beneath the performance of what it claims to be. I read every internal document, every financial statement, every project report from the previous 2 years. I met with every department head individually, asking questions and listening with the particular quality of attention that communicates you are not yet deciding anything, you are only learning. What I found was what I had expected. A company that had talent it wasn't using correctly, strategies that were sound in premise and poorly executed, and a culture that had been shaped by a leader who needed to be the smartest person in every room, and had therefore, over years, quietly discouraged the kind of honest internal dissent that keeps organizations from walking into walls. I had seen this before. I had lived adjacent to it for 2 years. The fixing of it was not complicated. It was simply patient. I restructured the project lead assignments. I created a new internal review process where ideas were evaluated on their merits with names removed from the submissions until after the first round of assessment. I reinstated 2 initiatives that had been shelved not because they were bad, but because they had been proposed by people Adrian hadn't particularly liked. By the end of the second week, something had shifted in the building. Not dramatically, not with announcement. Just the quiet shift of a place that has remembered it is allowed to function properly. Priya stopped by my office on a Friday afternoon at the end of week 2 and leaned against the doorframe and said, "People are staying late." I know. Not because they have to, because they want to. I looked up from my desk. "That's the difference," I said, "between working for someone who takes what you build and working for someone who builds with you." She nodded. "You should write that down." "Priya, I'm serious. You should write all of it down." I looked at her for a moment. "Get out of my office." She smiled and left. I turned back to my desk, and in the margin of the document I had been reading, in the small, automatic way of a thought that doesn't ask permission before it arrives, I wrote 2 words. "Write it." Adrian's email came on day 8. It arrived at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, sitting in my inbox between a due diligence summary and a calendar confirmation, unremarkable in its subject line. It simply read, "Zara and I would have recognized his name in any context, in any format, in any inbox, in any year of my life." I read it once. It was long. Longer than the text that had ended our engagement, which had been 11 words, and the length itself felt like a kind of confession. The need to fill space, to explain, to arrange facts into a version of events that he could live inside. He moved through several registers, wounded first, the language of a man who considers himself the victim of circumstances he set in motion. Then something that tried to be accusatory but lost its footing because the ground beneath the accusation was unstable. Then toward the end, something that might have been genuine, a sentence or two that read like the actual person underneath the performance, briefly visible before being covered over again. The closing line was, "I always knew you were talented, Zara. I just didn't think you'd use it against me." I sat with that line. I always knew you were talented. He had known. That was the part that deserved sitting with, not the accusation, which was misframed and would not survive contact with reality, but the admission inside it. He had known. He had watched me work and had known what I was capable of and had made, consciously or not, the continuous choice to contain it rather than amplify it, to keep the engine running without letting it be seen. And he called this being used against him. I thought about that. Then I wrote back. 4 sentences. "I did not use it against you. I used it for myself. That is the distinction you never understood. I hope Celeste does." I hit send. I archived the thread. I went back to work. His lawyer called my lawyer 2 days later. There was nothing to contest. The acquisition was clean. The documents were solid. The process had been conducted with the kind of meticulous legality that leaves no seam for a challenge to enter. My lawyer called me afterward and said simply he has no ground to stand on. "I know," I said. "He knows it too." Good. After that, there was silence from Adrian, the specific silence of someone who has run out of moves and has not yet decided what to do with that fact. I recognized it. I had lived in a version of it myself 3 years earlier, standing in a kitchen with a phone in my hand and 11 words on the screen. The difference was what you built inside the silence. 2 months after the acquisition, on a Thursday evening, I had dinner with Dominique at the Italian place we had been going to since our shared workspace years, when we split the cost of bad coffee and told each other we were going to build something worth remembering. We had both built something worth remembering. We ordered wine and pasta and talked about her latest project, a civic building renovation that she was treating like a small cathedral, all considered proportions and light. She showed me photographs on her phone. I gave her my honest opinion, which was that the east entrance was slightly wrong and the solution was obvious and she had probably already seen it. She had. She showed me the revised sketch. It was exactly what I would have suggested. This was one of the things I loved about Dominique. She didn't need me to pretend I hadn't noticed. She knew I had noticed. She had noticed too. We were women who paid attention, and we did not perform blindness for each other's comfort. "You seem different," she said over dessert. "Different how?" She considered. "Settled, like you've landed somewhere and taken your shoes off and decided to stay." I thought about that. I think I have. "The building? The work?" "All of it, but mostly," I paused, trying to find the accurate words. "I think I've stopped waiting for someone to confirm that what I built is real. I know it's real. I built it. That's enough." Dominique looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I've been waiting for you to say that for 3 years. "Longer," I said. "Longer," she agreed. "Since before him. Since before that whole chapter. You were always waiting for external confirmation of something that was never external." She was right. She had always been right about this. The particular hunger I'd had. Not for success exactly, but for being seen accurately, for the work being named correctly, for occupying the space my abilities had earned. That hunger had been present long before Adrian. He had simply made it more acute by feeding it poorly and then taking away the bowl. "What changed?" she asked. "I stopped needing the room to confirm it," I said, "because I became the room." She raised her glass. We drank. Walking to my car after dinner, I called my mother. It was late enough that she might be asleep, but she answered on the second ring the way she always did for me, immediately, without complaint, as if she had simply been waiting. "Zara, baby," she said, "how are you?" "Good," I said, "really good." A pause. "Then, I heard about the acquisition. News travels. Your aunt called. She said she read your name in a financial article. She called me to ask if it was really you." "What did you tell her?" "I told her of course it was you," a brief sound that was almost a laugh. "I told her you've been building to this since you were 12 years old, and told your father his business plan had a structural flaw." I smiled, walking through the cool night air toward my car. It did have a structural flaw. "I know it did. You were right. You were always right." Her voice shifted slightly. Warmer, lower, the voice she used when she was being serious and the way she rarely allowed herself to be direct. "I'm proud of you, not just for the company, for all of it. For leaving when leaving was the right thing, for building instead of breaking, for knowing the difference." "I had a good example," I said. "You had better than I gave you." "Mama." "You did, but you did it anyway. That's yours." I sat in my car for a long moment after we hung up, the city moving around me and her words sitting in the space. "That's yours." Everything I had built was mine, not in the legal sense only, though it was that too. Mine in the sense that it had come from something inside me that had always been there, the strategic mind, the patient precision, the willingness to work in the dark toward a light that nobody else could yet see. Mine in the sense that no one had given it to me and therefore no one could take it. Adrian had not made me. He had only, briefly, obscured me. And I had unobscured myself. That was the whole story. The speaking invitation arrived 6 weeks after the acquisition, from a technology and finance conference that gathered several hundred professionals each year for 3 days of panels and presentations, and the particular networking that happens in the margins of formal events. They wanted me to speak on strategic acquisitions. Specifically, they said in their email, on what they were calling the new generation of acquisitive leadership, founders who built from disadvantage, who identified undervalued assets that others had overlooked, who moved with the kind of precision that larger institutional players couldn't replicate. I prepared carefully, 3 days of notes, refined to 20 minutes of remarks, with the kind of precision I applied to every significant thing, cutting what was merely interesting and keeping only what was true. I was standing at the podium 11 minutes into my remarks when I said something I had not planned to say. It arrived the way real things sometimes do, not from the prepared notes, but from somewhere below them, from the actual experience, from the specific texture of having lived the thing I was describing. I said, the most dangerous thing anyone ever told me was that I needed them to be who I was becoming. The most useful thing that sane person ever did was make me prove them wrong. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the applause. Not polite conference applause, the other kind. The kind that means something landed somewhere real. I stood at the podium and felt it move through the room, and I let it settle before I continued, because some moments are worth the full second they require. Afterward, standing near the exit while the room cleared, a young woman approached. Early 20s, the kind of surface composure that barely contains what's moving beneath it. She had the look of someone who was carrying a decision that had gotten too heavy to hold alone. "I listened to everything you said," she told me, "but it was that line, about needing someone to become who you're becoming." "Yes," I said. "I'm in that situation. Right now, professionally," she paused, "and otherwise." I looked at her. I recognized the particular shape of what she was holding, not because I was perceptive, but because I had held the same shape for years, and I knew its weight precisely. "Are you about to leave?" I asked. "I'm thinking about it." "What's stopping you?" "I don't know if I'm ready." I thought about an elevator, 4 floors, the meeting with Gloria that was already scheduled, the white paper already published, the door I had been building in the back of a room before I had consciously agreed to walk through it. "You're already ready," I said. "You've been ready. What you're actually waiting for is permission." She looked at me. "You don't need it," I said. "Not from me, not from anyone. The readiness is in the preparation you've already done. Trust it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do you know I've prepared?" "Because you're asking the right question," I said. "Unprepared people ask whether they should leave. Prepared people ask whether they're ready. You already know the answer to should." She nodded slowly, the kind of nod that is also a decision. "Thank you," she said. "Build something with your name on it," I said. "That's all. Build something that is entirely yours." She walked away with something different in her posture. I stood there watching her go and thought about all the versions of that conversation, the one I had needed, and the people who had not been there to have it with me, and the strange grace of being now on the other side of it. Back at Wolf Capital Group, the transformation was taking shape with the particular momentum of an organization that has been given permission to function at its actual capacity. The two shelved initiatives I had reinstated were generating early results that exceeded the original projections. The anonymous review process had surfaced 3 proposals from junior staff members that were, without question, the strongest strategic ideas the company had considered in 2 years. I approved all 3. I named the people who had written them in the company-wide update that went out on a Friday afternoon. Priya read the update over my shoulder and said, "You know what you just did." Credited the work to the people who did it. "You just made 26 people feel like this company is worth fighting for." I looked at her. It is worth fighting for. It was always worth fighting for. It just needed someone to run it like it was. The quarterly results came in 11 weeks after acquisition. The numbers were not yet where I intended them to be. Recovery of this kind takes time and precision and the willingness to make decisions that feel slow in the short term and prove correct in the long one. But the trajectory was unambiguous. The company was moving in the right direction for the first time in 2 years. I sat in my east-facing office on a Tuesday afternoon, the city below, the file open in front of me, and I felt the specific satisfaction of a professional who has done the thing they said they would do. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something, call it instinct, call it the particular alertness that comes with having built something worth protecting, made me answer. Zara, Adrian's voice. Quieter than I remembered it. The performance register gone, or mostly gone. What was left was something closer to the actual person, which was both more and less than the performance had ever suggested. I said nothing. "I won't take long," he said. I needed to say something that wasn't in the email, something that's actually true. I waited. "I knew what you were," he said. "I knew from the beginning. And I think I made you smaller because I was afraid of what it would mean to stand next to someone who was actually as good as you were. What it would mean for how people saw me." Silence. "That's not an excuse," he said. "I know that. I'm not calling for forgiveness or anything. I just needed you to know that I knew, that it wasn't that I couldn't see it." "I know you could see it," I said. My voice was even, not warm, not cold, simply clear. That was always the part that was hardest to reconcile, being seen and still being contained. A pause. "I'm sorry," he said. And the thing about it, the strange and complicated thing, was that it sounded true. Not adequate, not enough to close the distance between the reality of what had happened and the word being applied to it, but true. "I know you are," I said. "Is that," he stopped, started again, "is that enough?" "For what?" "For anything." I thought about that, about what enough meant, about whether an apology changes the architecture of the past or only its emotional residue. "It doesn't change what happened," I said, "but it matters that it's true." I paused. "I hope you figure out what you want from the next chapter, Adrian, not for my sake, for yours." Another silence, longer this time. "You're going to be extraordinary," he said quietly. "You already are." "I know," I said. I said it without arrogance, without performance, simply as a statement of a fact that I had spent 3 years building the evidence for. I said it the way I should have been able to say it 3 years earlier, if I had known then what I understood now about the difference between what other people see in you and what is actually true about you, and how catastrophically those two things can diverge when you let someone else's vision of you become the one you live by. "Goodbye, Adrian," I said. "Goodbye, Zara." I ended the call. I sat with it for a moment, not with regret, not with residue, but with the specific texture of something that had finally and completely ended. The way a wound feels when it has healed past the point of tenderness. You press on it and find only skin. Then I put the phone on my desk and went back to work. 6 months after the acquisition, I received a message from a publisher. They had read a piece I had written for a finance and strategy platform, not a white paper this time, but something more personal, an essay about rebuilding organizational culture after leadership failure, which was in the text about Wolf Capital Group and beneath the text about something larger, something I had not entirely planned to say publicly. They wanted to know if I had considered writing a book. I had not, consciously. But Priya's voice was in my head, write it, and Dominique's voice, you should write all of it down. And the young woman at the conference exit, who had walked away from our conversation with something different in her posture. I sat with the message for 2 days. Then I wrote back and said, tell me what you're thinking. The conversation that followed was the beginning of something I did not yet have the full shape of, but which felt in the specific way that right things feel before they are fully formed, like the natural next chapter. A book about financial architecture, about building from the ground up, about what it means to create something with your name on it and nobody else's, about the particular education you receive when someone takes the work you have done and removes your name from it, and what you choose to do with that education. I told Priya on a Friday afternoon when she was doing her end-of-week debrief in my doorway. Her face did something I had rarely seen it do. You're gonna make me cry, she said, in this office, on a Friday. Priya, I'm just saying, I was there. I was at Meridian Tech when he gave your strategy presentation to those investors and introduced you afterward as his partner and watched you smile through it. I was there. She stopped. This book is for everyone who was there. It's for everyone who needed someone to be there and wasn't, I said. She nodded, straightened, put her professional composure back on over the personal one like the skilled woman she was. Monday, she said. First thing, we'll look at the timeline. First thing, I agreed. She left. I turned back to my window. The city was doing its evening thing. Lights coming on in sequence. The quiet transformation from day to night that the city performed every evening without drama or announcement, simply because that was what cities did, and the doing of it required no witness. But I witnessed it anyway. 1 year. I want to tell you what 1 year looks like when you have spent it building something real. It looks like an east-facing office where the morning light arrives before you do and is waiting when you get there. It looks like a team of people who stay late because they want to, who propose ideas with their names on them, who have learned that the person at the front of the room is not going to absorb their work and reflect it back as her own. It looks like quarterly numbers that tell the story of a company that has remembered what it was built to do. It looks like dinner with Dominique on Thursday evenings, the Italian place, the same table, wine that has gotten progressively better as both of us have gotten progressively less willing to drink bad things simply because they are available. It looks like Sunday phone calls with my mother, who has started calling me her daughter, the executive, in a tone that is entirely sincere and only slightly self-congratulatory, and I have decided to find this entirely endearing rather than complicated. It looks like a manuscript, partial, raw, not yet what it will be, sitting in a folder on my laptop that I open some evenings and add to and close again, building it the way I have built everything, one considered piece at a time. And it looks like this, a Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, standing at my east-facing window, watching the city arrange itself for another day. Priya appears in my doorway. You have a 9 o'clock. I know. New client, referral from the conference. I remember. She pauses. She has the look of someone who is about to say something that is not strictly work-related and has decided to say it anyway. Can I ask you something? You're going to regardless. Do you ever think about, not him, I don't mean him, but the version of you that was there at Meridian Tech? Do you ever feel sorry for her? I think about that. About the woman who swallowed things, who told herself the credit didn't matter, who cried for 4 floors and then straightened up and walked toward the meeting that was already scheduled because she had, below the level of conscious thought, already started building the door. No, I say. I don't feel sorry for her. She was doing what she knew to do with what she had. I pause. I feel grateful for her. She held everything together long enough to get me here. Priya looks at me for a moment. That's the book, she says quietly. That's the whole book in 2 sentences. She leaves. I turn back to the window. Below me, the city is moving, the way cities do, without waiting for anyone, without marking the moments that change the people moving through it, simply continuing, simply persisting, simply being the place where everything that needs to happen happens in its own time, to its own rhythm, to its own conclusion. I take a sip of my coffee. I think about 4 floors in an elevator, about 11 words on a screen, about a white paper published under my own name, and the quiet hours of a life that was rearranging itself without my full permission. About a woman in a dark blazer entering a meeting with Gloria and sitting across from those reading glasses and those annotated margins and hearing the question, "What would you build?" and answering it for 22 minutes without notes. I think about a rooftop in midnight blue, about 4 seconds of silence, about a sentence delivered without triumph, without cruelty, without anything except the plain and complete truth of it. Every floor of that building exists because of work I did, and starting Monday, I'll be running it properly. I think about all the women who needed to hear something like that and didn't, all the rooms where the work happened and the wrong name got attached to it, all the elevators and 4 floors of crying and mornings when the coffee went cold while someone sat with information they weren't ready to name. This is for them. Not the revenge. Though the revenge was satisfying, and I will not pretend otherwise because pretending otherwise would be dishonest, and I have committed to honesty at significant personal cost, and I intend to continue. But the revenge was never the point. The point was always this: the east-facing window, the team that stays because they want to, the manuscript in the folder, the 9 o'clock, the work, the life that is so completely, specifically, accurately mine, that the person who once tried to write my name out of it would not recognize himself in it anywhere. That is the real sentence, not the one on the rooftop. The one I say to myself every morning before the day begins, standing at the window with my coffee, watching the light arrive. I did this. Every floor of this life exists because of work I did, and I am running it properly.